Good afternoon, or should I say good evening, everyone. I will kick off with a opening prayer and karakia. Me unoi tātou, e te atua, tēnei au, tēnei mātou, au mema kua poti te hapori o whanganui. Arahina I a mātou, ke te whakatau nā whakataunga pai, mō te rohi, mō nā tangata katoa, kia piki ai te ora o te hapori. Mena iwi ka toa o whanganui, humie, huie, taikie. Let us pray, dear God, here I am, here we are, your elected members of Whanganui, guide us to make good decisions for the district, for all people, to uplift the community and all peoples of Whanganui, bring forth unity, it is done. Right, well, welcome to those online and welcome to those in the council chambers and welcome to Councillor Michael Law, cowboy hat and all from wherever you are, from school camp. All right. First of all, before I get into, we have an apology from David Wells from the Rural Community Board. That's noted. And any leave of absence? No. Any declarations of interest? Declarations of interest, and there's no additional information. All right. Okay, well that was quick. So we'll move on to the only item that we have here today, which is the reconsidering of food scraps collection service implementation following government policy change. So I'm just going to introduce this item and then pass over to our Chief Executive David Langford. And I'll speak to this item soon at the appropriate time. But I first of all want to say thank you to councillors for making this time to be here this evening. As I've said, some of you had to change arrangements, and I want to acknowledge that to be here, so thank you. Also, I want to say thank you to our Chief Executive and council officers who have had to swivel on this matter from being in implementation mode to pausing and pending the outcome of this decision, potentially scrapping the implementation plan. I also want to say thank you to many members of our community who have provided views on this matter, particularly in the last couple of weeks. Exactly 2 weeks ago, I asked our council to revisit this decision to implement a rates-funded kerbside food scrap service. This followed the learning of the dropped 2022 mandate for the service, which happened without an official announcement on 18 December. A few days before Christmas with little fanfare. Based on this and reflecting on community feedback, this extraordinary meeting today is the right thing to do despite previous council decisions to implement the service dating back to 2022. So I'd like to invite our Chief Executive to present this report. Over to you, David.
Through you, Chair, Your Worship even, remember my name change to Warren. So through you, Worship, I'm going to present this report that makes a recommendation to cancel the rollout of the food waste collection service in light of the change of policy position from central government. I'm not going to go over in any great detail the history of the decisions to date, or too much in the way of the pros and cons for the service, because those have been extensively debated in workshops and in council meetings here. Instead, I will focus more on the implications of the decision at hand in terms of the sunk costs, contractual obligations with our suppliers, and the consultation processes that you may or may not need to go through. But very quickly, by way of recap, the genesis of this proposed service goes back as far as, I suppose you could trace its roots to 2020 when Council declared a climate emergency. That then flowed through into the 2021 review of the Waste Management Minimisation Plan, which first proposed the introduction of the curbside services, both recycling and the food scraps. From there was a LTP amendment to introduce budgets for the new service in the long-term plan. That was done in 2022. And then from there, it's been through successive annual plan and long-term plan processes to make sure that the budget remains in the council's finances. It wasn't until 18th December, just gone, that the government's position requiring councils to either roll out the service by 2027 if they have a local processing facility, or by 2030 if they did not. That was when that changed, and the government confirmed that it was no longer going to be mandatory. And following that and some debate and workshops amongst yourselves, you gave direction to officers to bring this report back to you, so you had the opportunity to reconsider. I know a number of you through previous debates have placed quite a bit of weight on the fact that it was going to be mandatory, and that has been one of the factors that has effectively overridden the low level of community support, because it was going to be mandatory anyway. So then it became a question of more of timing. Do you go early and try and capitalise on some of the funding from the MFE, or do you wait until the mandatory deadline kicks in? That is the primary reason why you've got this issue back on the table today. The report speaks to the carbon savings, and we have had Eunomia do updated calculations based on the actual confirmed end destination for the food scraps. Those do produce a more favourable outcome in terms of a greater tonnage of carbon emissions saved. But again, I won't go into too much detail because the environmental benefits have been well debated already. So that brings us on to the recommendation to council. The main implication here with the cancellation is the fact that we are under contract with the supplier. For efficiency reasons, the decision was made and approved by council to tender both services as a package. That has delivered a tangible cost saving in terms of spreading the contractors' overheads over the two services instead of paying separately if they were tendered as separate contracts. So first and foremost, if you choose to cancel the rollout of the food scraps service, officers will have to negotiate and agree a variation to that contract with the supplier to remove the food scraps from the scope of that contract. That is entirely achievable and doable, and we've already had initial conversations with the supplier, and they've confirmed that they're agreeable to working with council, and that they have no interest in pursuing any kind of contractual claim or legal claim against the council for lost opportunity cost or lost profit. They're a local firm. They want to be seen to be doing the right thing by the Wanganui community, so they've got no interest in taking a litigious path with the council, which is really good, and I would like to take the opportunity to thank them for taking such a constructive position on this one. They do, however, have costs that they have incurred that they're not going to be able to recover. They've committed to building trucks, and they've committed to production runs of the bins, some of which have been produced. As of this point in time, all of those activities have been put on pause so that they don't continue to incur further sunk costs until this decision has been made. Sorry, just give me a moment to find my place in my notes again. So through some initial discussions with the contractor, we now have a reasonable indication of what those sunk costs are and how much of those costs the contractor thinks they can recover, say through on-selling the trucks that they've committed to or redeploying them onto other work that they have. So they are only proposing a proportion of those costs are passed on to the council, and that they will effectively wear the balance because they have opportunities to mitigate them. Those figures are still subject to moving, and we've had some correspondence as late as today suggesting that there may be further opportunity to reduce them a little bit further. At the same time, I've also been in correspondence with the Ministry for Environment and put a request to them that the waste levy funding that we were provided to support the rollout of the service is retained by the council and used to fund and offset some of those sunk costs so that they don't all fall on the ratepayer. I've got a meeting in my diary tomorrow with the senior management team at MFE to take that conversation further, depending on the outcome of this meeting this afternoon. So overall, factoring in the effect of those sunk costs, the impact on rates, should the service go ahead, would be an increase of about 1.5% for residential ratepayers, or if you take the average rates, about 1% for the average across all sectors. By cancelling the service, that 1.5% for residential ratepayers would be avoided, and that means that instead of the targeted rate for curbside collection services going up to $227 per SUIP per year, it would only be $164.50. So there is a material saving in terms of what the ratepayer would pay. Notwithstanding, there will be a little bit of additional costs that they have to pick up to recover those sunk costs that have already been incurred by our contractor. I'm going to now move on to the decision-making process and whether you do or do not have to consult. And I'm going to give you two different perspectives because this has been a topic of much debate amongst the management team, and there are differences of opinion. And whilst you've got my view of the situation in the report, I think you need to be aware of the counter views before you make your decision, because it is ultimately your call as council whether you do or do not consult further on this matter. So first of all, the most material issue is whether removing the service or not following through and launching the service constitutes a change that would trigger an LTP amendment. As you all know, the budgets were introduced into the LTP in 2022 via an LTP amendment. So on face value, you might make an assumption that you would need to make an LTP amendment to take it back out again. The analysis is that neither of the two triggers are met to warrant an LTP amendment. The activity, as it's written in the long-term plan, is described as waste minimisation, which includes both curbside collection services plus the education piece. So by not proceeding with one part of those, the activity in the LTP still exists. So you're not cancelling the entire activity, which would be a trigger for an LTP amendment. Likewise, we've looked at the stated level of service, because a material change in level of service would also be a trigger for a long-term plan amendment. And the conclusion there is that whilst it is a change in level of service, it's not a material one. And the justification for that is if you look at the performance measures that are in the long-term plan, even without the food waste in there, they remain credible and achievable, so you can meet the performance requirements in the LTP, whether the food waste is in or not. That's probably just simply by grace that because the collection services are new, the targets were relatively difficult to set. So year one of the LTP was to establish a baseline of performance. Year two of the LTP is to exceed the baseline. So quite open KPI targets that give you a bit of wiggle room effectively. On the basis that an LTP amendment is not required, because that would trigger a special consultative procedure where the Local Government Act requires you to carry out a consultation process, we then revert to the significance and engagement policy and the other decision-making requirements in the Local Government Act. And this is really where the difference of opinion comes in, which I'll explain. So the view that I've articulated in the report is that under your normal decision-making processes, you have to take into account the views and preferences of the community. It is not the overriding factor, and we've talked to you many times about how it's not a referendum, because you have to weigh those views and preferences against other factors. A good example would be under your previous decision, making processes, the views and preferences of the community weren't able to carry much weight because of the government's policy position requiring the service to become mandatory in time anyway. So, the Local Government Act says that it is up to the council's judgment and discretion as to how you inform yourselves around what the views and preferences of the community are. This matter has been consulted on multiple times, and you've heard very clearly and consistent messages from the community that there is a relatively low level of community support for the introduction of the service. My view is that you know the views and preferences of the community. Going and doing another round of consultation is only going to reaffirm that, and it is unlikely that you'll get a different outcome. So on that basis, I think you can rely on the previous consultations to make your decision today, and you don't need to do further consultation. The counter view of that is that in doing so, you are taking a little bit of a risk in terms of opening up council to a potential challenge of your decision-making process. And it would be a safer option to consult with the community again, and then off the back of that consultation, then make your decision. That can be done. We can include that in the annual plan consultation process if you direct us to do that today. And then you'll make a final decision as part of the deliberations process for the annual plan. The consequence of doing that, if you choose to proceed with the service, is everything will have remained on pause. There'll likely be a holding cost whilst we wait for those processes to play their course. And then the start of the service would be delayed, likely by circa 6 months, because we'll have to restart the process of bin productions, truck production, etc., etc. I wanted to be upfront and transparent about the two competing bits of advice. Ultimately, what it comes down to is your appetite for risk. If you are a little bit like me and you've got a greater degree of appetite and you're prepared to take the risk that someone could challenge your decision-making process, then make the decision today without any further consultation. If you're a little bit more risk averse, direct staff to undertake the consultation process, and then we'll bring you back the decision as part of the annual plan deliberations. I think I've probably covered enough now that we could move into questions.
Great, thank you very much, David. So, do we have any questions on this item? Councillor Robb.
Thank you. Thank you, David, and thank you for a very thorough report. And I just want to ask, you mentioned about a possible judicial review. So what are the consequences of a judicial review? Are they major?
Through you, Worship. So first of all, for those that don't know, judicial review is really the only avenue that a council decision can be challenged, and it is a challenge usually around a failure to follow proper procedure when making your decisions. Consequences can vary, but typically in the worst case it would involve being instructed by the court to repeat the decision-making process to correct whatever the procedural issue was. What the court doesn't do is overturn the decision. They're very much focused on the process that council followed to get to the decision, not the decision itself. And they will avoid making any comment around whether it was a good or a bad decision. That's for the council. Obviously, the biggest consequence here is reputational damage. If a council has got a judgment like that against it for not following a good, robust process. Other times, towards the less severe end of the spectrum, you might get some critical comment that the council's process wasn't perfect, but that the outcome was unlikely to be any different, so the judge wouldn't direct the council to repeat its process. You'd just get a critical finding, and then with that comes the reputational damage as well.
So what would typically happen to the costs of bringing a judicial review?
Like most things, the successful party would be able to apply to the court for costs.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
that is another risk to council if a judgment goes against us.
So what you're saying is that if the court found in favour of the council could sue for costs.
You could apply to the court for costs, I believe.
Yeah.
I'd want to just double check that with our legal counsel, make sure I've got that correct, but that's my understanding. I can confirm offline after the meeting if you want me to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Charlie.
Thank you. David, if we're going to compensate the contractor for sunk costs, why would it be extending his terms for 5 years?
So, through your worship, I mentioned before that there's potentially opportunities to reduce the sunk costs. So one of the ways that we could reduce the cost to the ratepayer is by, I suppose, helping the contractor spread their costs or giving them a greater opportunity to recover their costs over a greater length of time. One way would be to give them an extension to the contract so they have a longer term, and then they can spread those costs and hopefully minimise what we have to pass on to the ratepayer in terms of those sunk costs. So effectively, it's one of the potential mechanisms. We would go into that with the contractor through the process of negotiating a variation. So if there isn't a benefit to the ratepayer by awarding the extension, we wouldn't. But if there is a way of mitigating those sunk costs, then I think it's a small concession to make when the contractor is being so cooperative and working in such good faith with us.
And the other question was, could it be said the fact the government has withdrawn the requirement to make it mandatory, that it makes it easier or less risky for us to withdraw as well?
Makes it possible.
Through your worship, no, I don't think you can say that. I think the government withdrawing their policy on making it mandatory gives you a legitimate reason to reconsider your decision. It doesn't necessarily make the risk any lower, and you still have to follow proper procedure and make a good decision, but it gives you a reason to revisit it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Charlotte.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Has the contractor spoken about any cost implications or frustration / reputational damage around us extending the break period through a consultation, for a consultation?
Through your worship, not specifically around extending it for the consultation period. What I can say is the contractor is concerned if the council were to proceed because of the amount of public discussion, social media coverage, all of those things, that they're concerned that their own reputation might be damaged because they're seen to be part of forcing a service onto the community doesn't want. And they've been really clear that they want to avoid that because they are a local firm, they are part of the community. And that's part of the reason, again, why they're so willing to be cooperative with us is they don't object to the idea of council rolling out the service.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you quite answered my question. So my question was around if there's any cost implications from the contractor to halt the service to allow for a consultation.
Morgan, do you want to answer that?
Yep. So through you, Your Worship, we did have a very brief conversation with the contractor early on around the whole defer, but we were instructed not to look at defer. We have a cost for a defer for 12 months, and they have said that it would be a monthly, broken down into 12 months.
Right.
So if you do defer and if we put it on hold while you consult through the annual plan, and then you decide to go ahead through in June, then it'll be
Month by month.
month by month.
Yeah, Kapai, thank you. And just one more question. If this does become mandated again in the future by a future government, is it predicted that the cost of re-implementation will be higher or significantly higher than our current contract?
Through your worship, it would likely be higher. Obviously, the production run that's gone so far on the bins, we're gonna own those. We'll save them, put them into storage until we can find a productive use for them. But if it ever does become mandatory again, or if you in future waste reviews of the waste management minimisation plan, which we're legally required to do every 6 years, council chooses to implement the service, then we'll obviously put them into use there, which will minimise the cost. But yeah, if the contractor now sells the trucks that he's having made, then if and when council introduces the service in the future, you're back to square one of paying for the new trucks.
If the contractor would even want to re-engage in a contract with us at all.
Ouch.
Thank you. Councillor Kate.
Thank you. Thanks for the report, David. My family wouldn't think so. Got a few questions. So just to clarify, if the service goes ahead, we get to keep the government contribution, and if the service doesn't go ahead, you're going to negotiate with whoever to see if we can keep it and offset against our sunk costs. And those sunk costs haven't been budgeted so far. The offsetting government funding to those sunk costs hasn't been budgeted in what your report talks about.
Yeah. So through your worship, yes, for clarity, if the service goes ahead, then the MFE waste levy funding is retained and goes towards the implementation of the service. If the service does not go ahead, then the default position is we would have to return that funding, but we are going to negotiate and see if we can get some agreement for us to retain that funding. No guarantee, and I expect the odds of success are relatively low, but we'll try anyway. And the third part of your question is, if we are successful in retaining some of the funding, then that is not reflected in the figures in the report, and the costs to the ratepayer would come down further.
Right, thank you. Extending the contract over 5 years, and I think you've been quite complimentary about the opportunity for that. That said, surely it must be quite an advantage to be able to extend a term by another 50% on the current term. Could you comment on the risks to council by, increasing the longevity of that term? And I'd like you to cover things like what opportunities would we have to ensure we're getting best technology, best price, those sorts of things.
So through you, your worship, first of all, probably recap our procurement policy. So the procurement policy directs us to follow best practice guidelines, which includes the government rules for sourcing, which I've summarised in the report. Those rules are mandatory for central government agencies, but voluntary for local authorities to adopt. So the rules provide an exception and a list of exemptions that mean in certain circumstances it's appropriate for council to negotiate directly with an individual supplier. One of those is because you can create a unique opportunity for value for money that you wouldn't be able to get on an open tender basis. If there is a way of mitigating the sunk costs that results in a material saving to the ratepayer, then I think that is sufficient unique value to justify the use of those exemptions. It does come with, I suppose, a small degree of risk. Some contractors may feel aggrieved that the opportunity has been locked out for a further 5 years before the contract goes back to the market. Again, that risk is probably relatively low. On the flip side, being cooperative and prepared to enter these kind of good faith negotiations so that there is as close to a win-win outcome as we can achieve may mitigate some of the reputational risks that Councillor Charlotte alluded to if council is seen by our suppliers as being a little bit of an unreliable client. Going into those processes seeking a win-win outcome probably shores up our reputation with our suppliers a little bit as a counterpoint.
Okay, thank you. Morgan's this touches on Charlotte's question, and Morgan, you've talked about a month. Should we want to defer because we want to go through a consultation process or there's a change in government mandates, etc.? You talked about a month by month. What kind of? Can you just talk? I'm not getting it. Can you help me understand?
So through you, Your Worship, that would be only if you chose to go ahead with the service when you make your deliberations in June on the annual plan. If you decide to cancel, so all the work, procuring like manufacturing bins and building trucks has been put on hold while you make this decision, and it will stay on hold, and we will work with the contractor until you make a decision. So there's no further sunk costs. It's just an ongoing, if you do decide in June to go ahead, there'll be a delay to delivery of the service, and there'll be a cost.
An additional cost than if we were to make the decision today, for example.
A different cost, but yes, there will be a cost. So instead of delivering the service on 1 July, the contractor gave us a price for a defer of 12 months, break that down by 12 months, and there's a cost per month until the service is delivered. So it would end up being part of a targeted rate.
So through Your Worship, maybe to help explain, the contractor's expectation is that they're going to start delivering the service on the 1st of July, and they will start getting paid on the 1st of July. If we delay them until, say, December, because of the consultation process and an extended decision-making process, that delays when they start getting paid, and it extends the period where there's management activity, they're holding trucks, all of those things. They'll want paying for that interim period so that they're not losing money whilst we make a decision.
Do we have any idea what the is that the fixed cost? Surely they wouldn't be charging us the variable costs. Do we have any idea of what that cost is?
Yeah, through you, Your Worship, they did give us a annualised cost, so if you were to defer the start of the service by a whole year, was of the order of about $300,000, I think, from memory. Morgan, is that right? Sorry?
380.
380. And look, it was on that basis, because that holding cost is so high, that we didn't investigate the deferral option any further, because it's a very expensive way of going forward.
Okay, thank you. I was surprised to see the recommendation that you've made, actually, you know, in all the conversations that we've had. Can you talk me through your thinking process as we move from workshop into the paper for council?
Through Your Worship, look, it's been quite a difficult process forming up a recommendation on this report, and I'll explain why I arrived at the one that I did. But first, I suppose we had three choices as management. We either recommend that we proceed with the service, recommend that it's cancelled, or we make no recommendation and just leave it up to you as elected members to decide what you wanted to do this evening. In the end, making the recommendation to cancel the service was a multifaceted decision of mine. number of factors came into play. So when you made the decisions to proceed previously, it was under the it was in the context of it was going to become mandatory. So on that basis, you were able to say we're going to go ahead despite the low level of community support. That's now changed, and as a result, I think we need to give greater weight to the community's views and preferences. Similarly, the report talks about the cost to save the carbon in terms of a cost per tonne of carbon saved, and it's quite an expensive way to save carbon. Now, in the context of it being mandatory, it makes sense to proceed because you're being forced to, so you might as well make the carbon saving even though it's an expensive carbon saving. Without the mandate hanging over us, you have the opportunity to consider alternative carbon saving initiatives that may be way, way more cost effective. So again, that's a factor that came into it. There is also, I suppose, a health and safety and well-being factor associated with this. Over the last few weeks, our frontline staff have been subject to quite a lot of abuse from the community. And look, whilst I understand there's legitimate concerns from the community around the affordability of rates, particularly for people that are on fixed incomes, I get it. And it's another cost on top of everything else that's hit our community with the cost of living crises. But that's no excuse for some of the behaviour that our staff have experienced over the last few weeks. And I'm genuinely concerned that if we ignore the community's views on this and proceed, we'll be viewed, or certainly if I made a recommendation to proceed, we'll be perceived as being a little bit pig-headed and stubborn, and creating an environment where I expect our staff are going to get more of the same kind of behaviour because our community will be angry with us. And I'll just give you, if you don't mind, I'm going to just read a transcript of one of the phone calls that we received. And I'm going to apologise in advance because I'm not going to moderate the language. So this was a phone call that one of our frontline staff members in customer services received. And I quote, "Put me through to the dickhead who came up with this fucking idea. Tell them to shove the food scraps up his arse and see how he likes having his time and energy wasted. Do your fucking job." That's just one of many phone calls and emails that our staff have received. Calls for people to be fired. I mean, our customer services staff, for some of them, it's their first job out of school. It's an entry-level position within council. It's no wonder that we have such a high staff turnover rate. I think making a recommendation to proceed with the service would be making a recommendation to create an environment where our staff are going to continue to be subject to that kind of abuse. And that was probably one of the main deciding factors on forming my recommendation. And apologies again for the language.
Not at all. I mean, what do you say to that? I guess it begs the question of how that's going to influence decisions and recommendations in the future, the vocal abusive minority. One last question. Charlotte's alluded to the future, and you know, from the research that I've done in the last few days, it seems that most of the big cities in the world, and even the smaller cities in the world, have, as part of their waste stream, managing to their best efforts, their waste stream food collection service as part of it, particularly in intensified communities. I'm looking at you, Morgan. Your ear's close to the ground on this. Do you see any, you know, and this might be an unfair question, so feel free not to answer it. Do you see any, you know, should we get a change in government or in the future? Do you have any comment to make about the likelihood of that sometime down the road?
Through you, Your Worship, I don't have any significant intel. We do know that the government has revise the waste strategy, and that was announced last Friday. So I recommend you have a read of that as well. In terms of waste planning and planning for future, organics will rear its ugly head again and will be a key issue in the next waste plan as well. So it's another time you're going to have to discuss how we tackle that issue as a waste minimisation target. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Peter.
Thank you, and through the Mayor. It's a question for Morgan again. Sorry, Morgan. But what were the key outcomes from the trial that we ran?
So through you, Chair, you all know we ran a trial on 400 properties last year. Some of the key outcomes were that around 70% of those who participated and responded in the survey rated the service as good or very good, and general feedback was that actually it made them more aware of the food scraps they were producing and more aware of what was going in their landfill bins.
Yeah, thank you for that, because that was my assumption too.
Finished. Councillor Rob.
Thank you.
Back again.
Disappointing to hear what David had to say, and I hope that stops as of today. But I just wanted to ask you, David, in terms of the sunk cost, bit of confusion there in my mind. We understand the contractor's costs, and they're going to not pass a lot of that on, except their overhead. There's the question of the caddies, the bins, and I just wanted to get a picture on that, please, because we ordered 19,000 bins. So what stage is that at, and how much of that are we committed to?
I'll hand over to Morgan because I can't find the email quick enough in my inbox. We're partway through the production run on some of the bins or kitchen caddies, but Morgan, you can maybe remember better than I can.
So through your worship, we have had an email from the contractor this afternoon discussing further detail on the work that's been paused and where we're sitting. So they've proceeded with the order of the kitchen caddies. They are ordered, they're on their way. The kerbside bins, the resin for production of those bins has been ordered, so there will be some sort of associated cost with that, but they haven't progressed to manufacture for the kerbside bins. So that's where we're sitting. We are the proud owners of 19,000 kitchen caddies.
And well, regarding that, would you agree that when you look at the 20-odd councils in New Zealand that are offering a food waste collection, that they have an annual requirement for bins, for replacements and ones lost and damaged, and I think it's around 10% they allow. So would we not be better to accept the delivery of those bins and sell them on?
So through your worship, the kitchen caddies that have been produced, we will own those. And then yes, if there are opportunities to redeploy them, we'll take them. They may, though, have been stamped with the council's logo, which does limit the opportunities to reuse them. The actual bins, though, because they haven't been produced, if you choose not to proceed, then my recommendation to you would be to cut it there and go no further, because otherwise you'll end up with another problem that you'll have to try and solve.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to go to Councillor Ross. I think your microphone's playing up, so yeah.
It keeps dropping off 3 times, but that might be a plus. Most of my questions have been answered. My question, Your Worship, through you to our Chief Executive, is that in the draft resolution where it says delegates authority to the Chief Executive and it gives 3 tasks for you to perform, my assumption would be is that my question is that when that should that authority be given to you to do, and you get on with it, you'd be reporting back to council as to progress. Under what circumstances, because it's all on your shoulders, under what circumstances would you be coming back to council and saying, I need your authority beyond what we have already given you to do?
Through you, Worship, if so, I think there would be two factors. One, if there's an opportunity to save more of the sunk costs, so that we avoid that cost being passed on to the ratepayer, but it is outside of the things that are spoken of in this report, then I would come back because I would need your authority to agree to those other things, whatever they may be. The other reason for me to come back would be if, when we sit down and negotiate with the contractor, the cost that will be passed on to the ratepayer is greater than what is written in this report. I think that's unlikely because the contractor has given us what they think is the worst case scenario and indicated opportunities to reduce it. So I think that scenario is unlikely. But yeah, if I couldn't deliver the saving that the report speaks to, or I needed some other incentive to bring the cost down to the ratepayer, those would be the two factors that would cause me to report back here.
Thank you. Councillor, Deputy Mayor Helen.
Thank you. Through the chair, question for the CE. In the report, it states that if we don't proceed with the food waste collection, there will still be a circa $17 a year additional cost for recycling, kerbside recycling, and that's split into two areas. One will be a share of the overhead that the contractor would have incurred even if we only ever had one service, so that's fine. But there's and then there's the sunk costs, but you haven't given any split between in those two. Is there any idea of what that is?
Through you, Worship, yes, there is. As the report describes, though, I'm reluctant to go into any further detail because once you start breaking the contractor's pricing down, you start to potentially reveal their pricing tactics when they're competing for contracts. So it's in the ratepayer's interest to know what the bottom line costs are and what the ratepayer is going to be paying, but it is a matter of confidentiality in terms of the detail of how some of those numbers are built up. I'm happy to provide them confidentially to elected members outside of this meeting if you want to know, but I'm not going to talk to them in much detail here in a public forum.
Thank you. The other area is the main contractor may have some contracts, may have subcontracted part of this on, and there's one firm, local firm noted in the paper, who I'm assuming has got a subcontract. I'm just wondering, have there been any discussions with the main contractor about their commitments? I mean, I'm assuming it's all wrapped up into the cost. I'm just wondering if you have any other insights into any of that.
So, through you, Worship, I think the short answer to that question is yes, those conversations have started between ourselves and the main contractor, and then the main contractor and their suppliers and subcontractors.
I think you've answered that. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So that's all been taken into account in these figures, so thank you very much. Thank you.
I'll go to Councillor Michael on the screen.
Thank you, Mr. Mann. If it's all right for the question time, I'll keep my camera off because of low signal here in the rural areas. My question is, what is the total number of people offered the food scrap trials versus the number of people who responded with "this is a great service"?
So through you, Your Worship, we had a 25% response rate to the survey.
Morgan, can you remember how many households were participated in the trial?
400.
400.
So 400 participated, but how many were offered? So how many were turned the service down?
Could you repeat that? Sorry, you're a bit
How many people turned the service down?
through you, Your Worship. I don't know that stat.
Yeah, we can find out for you, Councillor Law.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mike, Councillor Mike, any other questions? Got your hand
Oh,
up still?
sorry. No, I just wanted to clarify that, yeah, out of 425 responded and 70% of those were positive. Thank you.
Sorry, can I just clarify? Over 100 responded, 25%.
Correct. And 70% of those were happy with the service, correct?
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
Right, thank you. Councillor Jenny.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. Just following on from those questions, because they were kind of like mine. How many households were being offered this, well, having the service of food scraps mandated to them? Like 18,000? Like how many? So I realise we've got rural as well, so not included. So how many households were included in the, were intended to be included in the delivery of the food scrap service?
So through Your
18,000?
Worship, it's just under 18,000.
Yeah, okay. So would it be fair to say that of the 18,000 homes, 400 were part of this trial? Of that trial, only 100 replied to the survey, and of that, only 70% or 70, give or take, rounding, said that they were happy with it. So that's 770 people, 70 families out of about 18,000 were favourable.
So through you, Your Worship, I'm going to jump in on this because that question's already answered, and I think you're making a political point. All of our consultations have very low response rates when you look at them as a representative sample of the total community.
Councillor Philippa.
Thank you. Kind of probably some similar, just trying to get some clarity. But I will just start with briefly saying, I think, David, you said the contract, you said the mandate, I'll call it, was one of the key reasons. For me, I'm pretty clear the mandate and the contract together were key reasons for council. But, sorry, is it in the paper? Can you just clarify the 2022 decision to put the contract together, recycling and waste, that had savings? What was the monetary value of that? Is that being clarified? Of those savings of a contract together compared to just doing the recycling then?
Through Your Worship, it's hard to quantify because you're benchmarking it against what would have been if you did something different, but obviously hasn't come to pass. But based on the conversations we've had with the contractor, the efficiency of spreading their overhead, having one management team, one office, one of everything, running the two services instead of tendering two contracts and running the risk of having two separate contractors, one per service, I would estimate that that efficiency saving was probably in the range of $200,000 to $300,000 per year of the service.
I'll leave that one at that. Can I just, it's just again, real clarity on the sunk costs. I realise it's not final because this decision has not been made, but it is talking $17 per suet at this stage with the contractor per year for the term of the contract, or what? What period of time?
Yeah, through Your Worship, for the term of the contract.
And the contract is currently a what plus what plus what?
It's 10 years. So, and just to be clear, a proportion of that $17 is rebalancing the contractor's overhead so that they still get paid for the management and administration of the service as a standalone service. The other portion is recovering the sunk cost, and there are some options. The contractor has offered to include that in his price and spread it over the term of the contract, but it may be cheaper for council to debt fund it and pay it off over a shorter period of time. So we will run those numbers once we've got a decision from you and decide which is the optimal scenario, and we'll go with the most cost effective.
Okay, and kind of the last kind of question is around the Ministry of the Environment, the waste levy. The conversation you're having around the waste levy, and going to use some of that to offset the sunk costs. Depending on how that goes, obviously you can't answer that now, but there is, even if worst case is that full amount is, if we made this decision to cancel the full amount of that waste levy subsidy, I'll call it, it has to go back to, there is always is there not always an opportunity to apply? I mean, the waste levy is something we build up every year, but to apply again for specific process, for example, if we decided to cancel the contract but look to invest more in some of the other options with the community around, sorry, I'm looking for the right word, composting, etc. But some kind of, is that correct?
Through your worship, yes, there's always the opportunity if you don't go ahead with the food collection service, but there is another initiative that council wants to pursue, then yes, we can reapply to the waste levy fund to see if we can get that particular initiative funded at the time.
Thank you.
Councillor Ross.
Thank you.
Oh. Yep, no, go ahead. Yeah.
Apologies for not asking my second question earlier. Through the chair to the CE, the downline part of this is that if the contract was to continue, there would have been diesel trucks going up to Aotearoa, and there would have been a part service to Easy Earth. Are those two companies factored into the calculations as to how far down the line they are or not in should we close the service?
Through your worship, yes, they're factored in, so the numbers that you've got in the report, all of those things take into account. I'm not sure how far the main contractor has got with actually entering into contract with those, so they could have still been at the negotiation phase. Yeah, but they're included in the figures in the report.
Councillor Rob. Mate, that's the last question.
Okay. Just a question for Morgan, please. The participation rate for the dry recyclables, you told us was 68% of all households and take part over any 1 month. So, in your experience, you've in New Plymouth, where you've come from, was there any survey done of the participation rate in the food waste collection?
I can talk about that, yeah. So yes, when I worked at New Plymouth, I worked in waste operations and we ran the food scrap service there. We conducted 2 food scrap audits, similar to what we did here for the recycling. And it was showing on any given week, there was about a 35% presentation, but over a period of a month, it was about 60%.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. So we'll finish the questions there. I think we've done pretty well. So hopefully everyone's got a good understanding. Also those in the community as well. So I'm going to move the motion that's on the screen, that the council cancels with immediate effect the implementation of the planned curbside food scraps collection service. That's item A. Item B, delegates authority to the Chief Executive to vary the contract for service with the contract to 1. Remove the food scraps collection from the scope of the contract. 2. Extend the term of the contract by up to 5 additional years. And 3. Adjust the schedule of prices in the contract to account for the above changes. And C. Notes that not proceeding with the food scraps collection service is inconsistent with the Waste Management and Minimisation Plan of 2021. I think I've got Councillor Michael as a seconder. Is that correct, Michael?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. But before we move into comments, I'll quickly, I've been approached by Councillor Charlotte to propose an amendment, which I'm happy to accept. So you put that on the screen, thank you. Michael, you may or may not have seen this. Can you see that?
I've seen it. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I know you've been in discussions with Councillor Charlotte. So, are you happy to accept the wording in D and D?
I am. Yes.
Okay, great. I'll read those out just for clarity. That's right. Bear with.
Can you just note that Councillor Michael is the seconder?
Oh, did I not say
For
that?
the record, yeah.
I asked if he was the seconder, so just for the record, I think that was captured. Yep.
For the
No.
for the amendment.
Oh, for the amendments as well. Okay. Yep, so the amendments are D, broadens the scope of waste minimisation education, and E, notes through the waste management minimisation plan review will include an investigation of opportunities to partner with our community to encourage home composting, including bid subsidy, education and pest management and commercial food waste diversion from landfill. Right. Great, thank you.
Sorry.
Councillor
I
Kate.
just wanted to request you to take those separately, please.
I was just about to ask that. Thank you, Kate.
When we vote for those, or
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah,
please.
okay, that's fine.
Not necessarily to speak to them separately, but
Yeah. So can I speak to?
Point
Yes,
of
I'm
order,
just going to.
Mr.
I've just got a few lights on, so let me just. Councillor Deputy Mayor Helen was first. Before then, I go to
Thank
Councillor
you.
Josh.
I did actually send an email earlier before Charlotte's suggesting that I'd be putting an amendment to this, which obviously is missed you by.
Right. Okay.
It's only for clarification. It's not significant.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Do you have?
Oh, it was very small, and it's really just for clarity. It was under B, where it says delegates authority to the chief executive to vary the contract for service with the contractor. It's contractor, very minor, sorry. And then what worries me about that clause is that it doesn't actually say what the contract is, and I believe the contract is curbside pickup, isn't it? Is that what the main?
Curbside food collection service.
No, it's because B actually refers to the entire contract.
Recyclables collection.
Recyclables collection. So I could just, if we could add, delegates authority to chief executive to vary the curbside recycling, curbside collection contract.
Yeah.
I'm happy with that.
Otherwise,
I mean,
the chief executive could alter any contract he liked.
yeah, no, that's
Very flippant, I know, but
certainly not a substantive change. I'm happy with that,
Not if the
Councillor.
contractor likes being employed, the chief executive likes being employed.
Right. Thank you. That's the extent
you,
of it. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor. Councillor Michael, I'm happy as a mover with that clarification.
Yeah,
You too.
I accept that, and very good pickup, Helen.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. We're all in agreement so far. That's a good start, isn't it? So, sorry, Councillor Josh, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I've just got a couple of questions about Councillor Charlotte's amendment that I'd like clarification on. The first one is around E, and it's probably a question of the Chief Executive. Is it within the scope of the Waste Management and Minimisation Plan to include pest management in that?
I can speak to my purpose.
Okay,
around
I'll let the Chief Executive answer that. Then I'm
Mine's
going to come
running a
back
bit blind,
to you,
but-
Councillor. Sorry, I'm going to come back to you, Councillor Charlotte, to be able to talk to this, so you'll get an opportunity.
So, through your worship, I'm going to say no, but. So, no, I think pest management is outside of the scope of the waste management minimisation plan, but the way the resolution is worded there, it would allow us to look at pest management at the same time as reviewing the waste management minimisation plan as two connected issues. You would just put whatever the pest management initiatives were into a different plan. So I think fundamentally I've got from a management point of view, I have no issue with either of those amendments. They're workable. We can deliver on them. And by and large, they're kind of asking us to do what we're required to do anyway under the review of the Waste Management Minimisation Plan, or the current LTP activities, because that already includes an education stream.
Okay. And the second question that I have is around D. So the way that I'm reading it, I'm sort of going from the top of the recommendation, which is that the council, and then D, broadens the scope of waste minimisation education. That to me, in terms of the wording, is very broad. And so I'm wondering around whether the wording is appropriate, given that it would probably involve future resources and therefore a budgetary decision, whether it needs to be pulled back a bit to use a term like investigates or something like that, given that there would probably need to be another decision around what broadening waste minimisation education actually looks like.
Through you, Worship, I will invite Morgan just to come up and maybe speak to a bit of detail on this one, but my understanding of the intent here is, if you look at the activity as it's written in the long-term plan, our education initiatives have a particular focus on school visits. That's the non-financial performance target that we have, is I think it's 10 visits to schools per year. So I think the intention here is to broaden the scope of that activity to try and encourage home composting and alternative ways of dealing with food waste between now and when we do the review of the Waste Management Minimisation Plan. I have no particular issue with that. We'll be able to do something with the education resource that we're budgeted for. It may eat into some of the school focus, and we'll balance the two competing needs. But yeah, you may want to amend the wording just so that the resolution stands on its own and is a little bit clearer that that's what the intention is.
Oh, look, I'm happy with that. I certainly don't want to see extra cost incurred by ratepayers, so if that's what it means, then that's fine. You happy with that too, Michael?
Morgan, did you have anything to add on to that?
Yeah, I do. I just wanted to just outline that the current waste plan, the supporting actions, so you have 4 key actions, and then you have a raft of supporting actions, and education sits under those supporting actions. So we can absolutely start focusing on more of those supporting actions now that we know that, like, whatever decision you make today, but you know, we're not meeting the actions of our waste plan, so we can look at those supporting ones to kind of bolster our diversion.
Thank you.
All right. What I said I would do is invite Councillor Charlotte to just clarify that briefly, the additional points, and I'll come back to others if you've got any further questions.
Okay, thank you. So in the event that the recommendation is carried, it is really important to me that measures are put in place for us to stay the course towards our emission reduction targets and our waste minimisation targets. There's been a lot of rhetoric within the community that households already compost, but there are many that don't because they actively choose not to or don't know how important it is. This amendment ensures that our KPIs around this education piece are brought in to support our community to appropriately deal with their own food waste. It also supports our community organisations who are already doing great work in this space to do more, which ultimately supports council to work towards meeting our targets.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. Sorry, but I still have a question for clarifying what Councillor Mesler means in E when she says pest management.
Okay. Yeah, what specifically is your question?
Councillor Mesler, so Charlotte, is that about pest management related to food, to food composting?
Correct.
Correct. So could I suggest an amendment to make that clear? Because otherwise it sounds like you're introducing a whole new thing, which is pest management. Could I suggest that in E?
Well, I could say urban pest management.
No, I was going to say related. So if you just put related pest management it makes it very clear that it's pest management related to food.
I understand your point there, but pests do live in our urban environment, regardless of whether compost exists in gardens or not. Compost does, I guess, provide extra food source for pests. So I don't see that extension to the amendment is completely necessary, personally.
So for clarity, your intention is to add a completely different or additional service.
No.
It's
it says there to investigate opportunities to partner with organisations. So my thinking around that is that predator free already exists and functions in Wanganui. There could be an opportunity to bolster funding towards predator free to help support the home composting solution.
Yeah. Look,
it says investigate, so it doesn't tie us to anything in particular.
No, but it's another work stream. But look, that's fine. I think I understand what you're trying to do.
The point of it was that there has been a lot of rhetoric from our community in the last 2 weeks because a main concern that has been coming through is rodents in relation to implementing the service or not. Whether it's home composting or utilising the caddies, it's consistent. And so for me, it's a way of listening to our community and providing a solution to support us finding solutions to meet our emissions targets and waste reduction targets.
I'm going to go to our Chief Executive, David, to respond to that.
Through your worship, if it helps, again, I think the wording, as Councillor Charlotte has outlined, it's investigate, but more importantly, it's about opportunities to partner with the community and other organisations. So that could be, if you fast forward, for example, if we're encouraging more home composting that runs the risk of increasing rodent pests, that we do that initiative in partnership with the regional council, who have the function of pest management for the region, and we make sure that the two services are delivered side by side in an integrated way. So I don't see the resolution as it's written committing council to running a pest management service that duplicates that regional council's function.
Yeah, I was about to mention that that's pest management as a horizons functions. Yeah. Okay. Right. I think we've clarified that. Your light's still on. Okay. So we've had questions. So we'll move now to comments. Councillor Rob, your light's on?
No, I mean,
okay.
I was there for the comments.
Okay. Well, I'll let you go second. I'm going to kick things off.
There's a whole lot.
So, as I've communicated, I've never been a fan of the service, which is why I've asked for this council meeting and to be an extraordinary meeting to be taken today, and why I've asked for this to be revisited. And following the reading of the excellent council report, my hope, as it has always been, and for the reasons I asked this to be brought back to the council table, is that the service does not eventuate. My reasons are very simple. Excuse me. The mandatory requirement for curbside food collection has been dropped. We no longer are required to undertake the service. Need some water, sorry. Excuse me. Given there are some sunk costs, minimal, I suggested to our Chief Executive that we look to retain the Ministry of Environment levy and to go towards recouping the costs due to the mandate. I think as given the government mandated it, we've progressed this, and now it's been unmandated. I think we need to recoup some. It's fair that we request the retention of that levy. The second point, after the mandatory requirements being dropped, is that many people already compost. Those who don't can use local composting companies like Easy Earth, so there is potential for low participation rates as many people are already composting or diverting food scraps to other outlets. Thirdly, that's my next point. I'm talking about chickens, but third point is, is education and promoting composting are far better alternatives than curbside collection, such as promoting programs in schools, gardening workshops, cotton hold composting, worm farming, and so on. I think everyone around the table, I would imagine, is would agree that composting is a good thing. But education and promoting are better options than the curbside collection service. Fourthly, affordability to our community at a time when many people are still struggling. If we decide not to proceed, there will be a reduction of, as has been pointed out by our Chief Executive, of 1.5% on the rates of the 18,000 residential households who would be using the service. That is no small number. Every penny matters to our community, and as we implement our 6-point plan for cost savings and efficiencies, it makes no sense to put an additional rate burden on our community when households are challenged already. Point 5, the original price of the service has increased during this decision-making time. Point 6, the vast majority of our community do not want this service. They never have, they still don't, I don't, and I'm hoping that we have a majority around the council table who will see the sense of not imposing this service on a vast majority who just do not want it and never have. Here are some comments from a selection of the community who don't want this service. Common sense prevails. It should not be imposed on anyone already doing their bit for the environment. I would prefer to keep my personal compost going. Council, listen to your community. Thank you, and we hope this gets dropped, as it would be totally useless to us. We compost all ours into the veggie garden. Good news, I've spoken to lots of people in the last few days and not one person liked the idea. Let's hope it gets canned. Green waste bins are already available through current service providers for those who would like to pay for it. Thank you for listening to our community, a real display of how local government and councillors should be operating. I like this last one. Fingers crossed this gets scrapped. I don't want pet maggots. I stumbled across a great word today as well. This is a separate one. And this is credit to a member of our community. I do like discovering new words. So I'll put it into a sentence. Any decision to implement a rates-funded curbside food scrap service is an unnecessary, wasteful and unwanted boondoggle. There you go. This service is a boondoggle. Boondoggle is a waste, and we do not need this service. Thank you. I'll go to other comments. Councillor Robb.
Thank you. Well, firstly, thank you, Mayor Andrew, for reintroducing this service onto our agenda tonight. We needed an opportunity to readdress this since the government's change of mind on 18th of December, and this has given us the opportunity to do that. Nationally and internationally, targets are set to address climate change by reducing carbon emissions. Regionally and locally, the same efforts are being made. And decomposing organic waste in the landfill generates methane and works against these efforts to reduce emissions. The fact is that over half of what some send to the landfill can be recycled, reused, or composted. Government is addressing this by making the cost of disposal to landfill increasingly more expensive. They've increased the levy from $10 a tonne to $60 a tonne. Expect a lot more. In Australia, it's $260 a tonne. In the UK, it's at a similar level, and they have made a target of closing all landfills by 2030. The curbside recyclables has diverted about 30% of this 50% away from landfill. But that still leaves a shortfall of around 20%. Food waste is more than half of that residual. And that is why the central government plan was to mandate all New Zealand councils to provide a food waste collection service. So the goals are noble, but I'm not supporting the retention of a mandatory service tonight. I supported it initially, but during the last election campaign, I advocated that I would support council reviewing this service. I just question whether the compulsory curbside collection is the best method to achieve the target of emissions reduction. The study by Eunomia indicates that the net saving in CO2 emissions gained by the service will be 865 CO2 tonnes at a cost of $1,650 per CO2 tonne. This compares that if we planted the equivalent 65 hectares of trees, that could be done for the same annual cost of the food collection service, and the cost per CO2 tonne recovered would be $110 to $120 per tonne. However, I believe that council should still endeavour to achieve the targets in the waste plan, but not in this mandatory way. Those in the community who do not currently divert food waste from landfill should be offered a simple and affordable way to do this. The cost of the proposed collection service reflects the cost of collecting at the curbside. Council is in a very strong position to offer a food collection drop-off service at the WRRC, the Waste Resource Recovery Centre in Mariah Place, and this service could not only be profitable, it would not require rates input. The cost of the proposed service at $80 per annum is excessive and unaffordable to many, especially those who currently home compost or dispose of their food waste in other ways. Yes, there are some sunk costs to recover, but we are fortunate to enjoy a very cooperative relationship with the contractor, Low Cost Bins, and I am confident that these sunk costs will be minimised. But rather than lose a valuable tool to meet our waste minimisation targets, I believe strongly that we can introduce a better and more affordable service for the ratepayer and the community by cancelling this contract and offer an optional one rather than a mandatory one. Thank you.
Councillor Charlie.
I was actually going to go later, but I'll go now. I'm going to support this, but I'm very concerned about the extension, the 5-year extension. That effectively gives the contract 16 years. And to put that in perspective, at the end of that contract, Councillor Rob and I will be into our 90s looking to the barrel 100 years old. So it's a long time, 18, 16 years.
You'll be around.
For those who didn't hear online, Councillor Vincent said he'll still be here sitting at the table in 16 years, so everybody did laugh.
Right, great, thank you. Councillor Peter.
Yeah, thank you. Food waste. If you have worked in the area of food poverty, you would understand the extent, the amount of food wastage in our community. The amount of food overproduced, wasted. The amount of food oversupplied for sale, wasted. The amount of food purchased and not consumed, wasted. Should make you wonder the value we place on this precious commodity that we now send to landfill to turn into methane and carbon dioxide, poisoning our atmosphere for our children and grandkids. The question is our community now mature enough to reevaluate our role in the food cycle? The question then, is food scrap collection for recycling a good thing and the right thing? A good thing? Yes. The right thing? It's part of a much larger waste picture. Reduce, reuse, repurpose, recycle. It's about awareness and education. In regards to the fact it has no longer become mandatory, can I remind councillors of what I have stated previously? Politics really should be ethics put into practice. This means taking a moral stand, not for the purpose and the hope that it will bring political results, but as a matter of principle. Our role as council is to lead, not to be led. Thank you.
Councillor Josh.
Yeah, thank you. I will be voting against this recommendation and to proceed as planned. For me, this was always about achieving the targets that we set out in the 2021 waste plan, a key part of which was the implementation of the food waste service. And I can just not understand why, for myself or for any other elected member, I would vote for a waste plan that set this service out as a key way of achieving the target and then vote against the service. So for that reason, I've been consistent the whole way through in my support of this service. Today I want to talk predominantly about process, because it is the process that primarily disappoints me around how we've come to this meeting today. There has been plenty of chance to change or reverse course before now, beginning first with the long-term plan amendment in 2022 to include a food waste collection service. There was a resolution on May the 26th, 2022, was moved by Councillor Robb, it was seconded by myself, to introduce the service. As part of that resolution, of the current councillors sitting around this table, it was only Councillors Anderson and Baker Hogan who voted against that motion. And I want to note that at the time, there had only been a signal that a government mandate may be introduced. There was no mandate at that point. And so again, I come back to the fact that this service was about the waste plan. It was never initially about a government mandate. That mandate came in March 2023. I also want to note that we chose to defer this service by 1 year during the 2023-24 annual plan due to the cost of living. And again, that was an opportunity to revisit and discuss the efficacy of this service overall. And we did not take that opportunity, we only chose to divert. And finally, I want to talk about recent history and note that we had this debate reinitiated by the Mayor about 2 weeks ago. And I would note that as part of the budget setting process, elected members have attended workshops where this issue has been discussed. The most recent one was on the 26th of November 2024, where we decided to proceed with this service as planned. I know that the Mayor and maybe other elected members were apologies for this workshop, but that was a decision that this council made collectively. And I would note again that on the 11th of February, after the mandate had been reversed, officers reminded council that we had previously made this decision to proceed with the food waste service on the 26th of November. There was not a single elected member at that workshop on the 11th of February who suggested that we might want to reverse course. That came later when a couple of Facebook posts emerged on Wanganui and Area News and on Wanganui News and Events. And that is primarily what has driven us back to this table to make a decision. And I question whether those Facebook posts are enough of a reason, given that we have been going through this process since 2021, for us to reverse course. And so for me...
Point of order, Josh.
Okay. Councillor Michael, what's your point of order?
Just misinformation. On 11th of February, I did very clearly state that we should re-debate the issue. So it wasn't 100% unanimous.
That's fair enough. I can respect that. And that brings me to the end of my contribution, which is that I am concerned about the ability of staff to go away in future and implement the decisions of this council, given how prone we've been over the last probably 18 months or so to relitigate our decisions. And this to me is another example of that. And I do worry about our ability to confidently set direction going into the future. So I won't be supporting this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Philippa.
Yes. I mean, I say, the truth is I nearly gave up, and I'm pretty sure that the last workshop you're talking about, Councillor Josh, that I was like, this is not going to be revisited. But in brief, we know the community never wanted this, okay? No kind of surveys ever told us they wanted this. They've never supported it. And it is time that we listen to them. And you know, so I do say on this, good on the Mayor, that he could bring it back to the table. Get us to rethink about this. But I will say, I mean, I don't buy into that the change in the mandate is primarily the reason that we should change it. The reason we should change it is because the community never wanted it. We made this decision in a cost of living crisis. There's always been other options and more community-focused options, in my opinion, and yet we still went ahead. I mean, I've written a whole lot more, but you know, we can say $80 is a few Netflix subscriptions, etc., or we can go, it's some milk, it's some bread, it's helping a ratepayer pay for our rates. Of course, there's a few risks around this now, but you know, I think you know, we could bring up another. You know, I think there's a level of you know, that the community can actually go, they actually have listened. It may have been late, it may have a bit of cost, it may you know, but the paper tells us that we've worked through that, you know, the chief executive has a confidence that he's recommended this. The contractor is not running away or not running to their lawyer. And the community goes, well, even if it is late, and even if the Mayor said to us at the 11th hour or whatever that he just did more work or whatever, and it wasn't just, I think he's talked to us and he'll probably say, it's not just Wongney area news, etc., but there's been a wide cross-section of this community who the wide cross-section of this community supported recycling. That was still a big decision. We still had people come back to us, but we've been told in every survey that the majority support this, and we've been told in every recycling, we made that decision. Not so with this, not so, and so, you know, for me, I think it's time that there's a real win for the ratepayer. That they've told us we've got other options. This paper says we can do it. We've got a willing contractor. A contractor that can work with us with this, and I really hope that the majority of people make this decision for the ratepayer today to get rid of this $80 per year cost, and we look at some other really good community options. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be supporting removal of the service. It's a tax. It's an unwelcome tax. It'll potentially save the ratepayer 1.5% on a rate that we know is coming down, and we hope it'll come down further. And after 2 years of high rates across the nation, for reasons we've covered, we deserve a break. We really need some good news. And all the biometric figures that I've read is the emissions currently and would be saved are negligible. Whanganui will not make a difference. You could stand on principle and say every little bit counts, And I agree with that. And I agree with Councillor Charlotte's addition about finding other ways. It is not my place to tell people what foods they should buy when the supermarkets put cheap foods in front of you. It's not my place to tell you how to eat the foods that you consume, and it's not my place to tell you what to do with the food that you waste, because your cooking skills may not be up to par, or you've got finicky eaters in your home, or you've got such a good income you don't mind wasting the food. That's none of my business. And council should step away from that, and how we educate our public will be seen later when we revisit the waste minimisation plan, because we're not in sync with it should we pass this decision. When it comes to Councillor Josh and a couple of comments on social media, I'm part of that problem. I said to those people on social media, and we all know I'm a social media addict, that's on me. And I said, for God's sake, stop whinging. We don't monitor the site except for me. Put it to council. Oh my God. Then a certain Facebook poster interpreted that to say, your council is inviting you to contact you by email. And they did. And then I heard what happened to staff. They were unprepared, they were unready, and largely quite young. And I felt bad because I was part of what happened. And I think the person concerned should apologise. I'm apologising publicly. I am on social media. This is not what has influenced me. When the mandate was removed and we found out, belatedly in late January, early February, I also recall 2 councillors in November saying, could we just inquire as to what it might cost if we were to withdraw from the contract? There were mutterings going on late last year and I was part of it, albeit I was the poster boy beforehand. Now I'm not. Bottom line is what I said at the beginning. 1.5% rate reduction, we hope. Let's give our ratepayers a break that they deserve. Thank you.
Councillor, no, it's Deputy Mayor Helen.
Thank you very much. Right. So the mandate that the government had was important for me in continuing to support the food scraps collection because it was going to come in anyway. So it made sense to do that when we were bringing in the other service, negotiating for that. It is important to reduce emissions. But there is new information in this report that I do not believe I've had in the past, and that's, I'd like to thank the CE for this report and the staff involved. The new information for me, and the critical one, is that a food scraps curbside collection overall will cost $1,650 per tonne of carbon saved, versus one example that was in the paper of $120 for the same effect. That was planting of trees. And to me, that's huge, hugely critical in my decision here. We must get the best bang for our buck, because it is ratepayers' buck, and it's part of our duty, it's in legislation, that we must have the most cost-effective use of ratepayers' money. And there's no way that this service can be justified because of that. I saw those numbers, and this discussion was all over for me. So I'm looking forward to, thank Councillor Charlotte for raising the point of, we do want to educate our community, and we do want to look at how else we can reduce emissions from food waste, because that is critical. So very lastly, I do want to thank the Mayor for pushing to bring this item to the table, because those numbers speak for themselves, and I think it's a good thing that we're redebating this. I want to thank the staff and the CE for so quickly pulling this all together, and for the quality of the report. And I want to thank the main contractor, Low Cost Bins, isn't it? Yep, I just want to make sure I get that right. because they really are coming to the party on this, and they are wanting to be a very good corporate citizen for Wanganui. Thank you, everybody.
Great, thank you. Councillor Charlotte.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I'd just like to note I found it concerning and saddening to hear that our frontline staff have been receiving abuse from some Wanganui residents. I'd like to say a huge thank you to the council staff that have fielded these calls and to all of those that have had a role in bringing this report to us so quickly and with so much detail. I'd also like to thank those in the community that have engaged with us on this matter respectfully and productively. And finally, I'd like to thank Low Cost Bins for being so accommodating. I find the sunk costs on this very difficult to swallow. I don't think central government truly understands the hemorrhaging of resources that inevitably occurs when decisions get constantly overturned. This is a perfect example of what may seem like a minor decision for Cabinet, which has costly implications for Council. I was disappointed in our MP's comments on this revoked directive, showing his lack of understanding of impacts of decision-making without consultation. I would not be surprised if this is mandated again in the coming years, and no doubt by then the costs will be much higher due to inflation and reputational damage in our procurement processes and decision flip-flopping. We need long-term thinking, extending landfill operating potential by removing waste that can have a purpose, i.e. food waste, to compost. It is essential to be working towards a more sustainable future. It's obvious that our current way of life and consumption is completely unsustainable. In an ideal world, we would all be considerate of our own consumption and all be productive and responsible with waste minimisation. But data shows that we don't all compost, either because we don't know how, don't understand the importance of it, or simply can't, due to disability or lack of garden space. I've had multiple people in our community that fit in those categories ask for me to speak on their behalf today. For me, a big part of this service was to provide equitable opportunity for everyone to participate in waste and methane reduction, and to help educate our community on the importance of separating our waste. The fact that it was mandated made this direction easy, but it is important to note that the introduction of our waste management minimisation plan dates back before this directive was mandated. This is due to green waste and food waste being a key issue in global emissions. This is a real and tangible problem. We may not be able to see it, but we can certainly see the impact of it. Every month, every season, we get more dramatic weather events. I explained to my 6-year-old boys last week why they would have to have a babysitter tonight. I told them about the impact of that emissions are having on our planet. I told them what happens to food when it gets taken to landfill. I'm pretty sure you can imagine how they asked me to vote today. I understand that people are struggling. I myself am on a fixed income. I am a ratepayer and I am a solo mum. I know that things are getting tighter. But I also know that we collectively need to take control of emissions, take responsibility for our consumption, and to ensure that our kids and grandkids have a future. I personally only put an 80-litre bin out about every 4 or 5 weeks because I am conscious of what I consume and how I consume it. I recycle, I compost, I have chickens. I would personally barely use this service. But that does not preclude me from seeing the collective benefit for our community and our world as a whole. 865 tonnes of CO2 emissions in the scheme of global emissions is small, but it is meaningful. I note the suggestion that a more cost-effective option would be planting trees. However, it needs to be an and, along with waste diversion and minimisation. Ultimately, we need to be reducing carbon and sequestering it. It is not one or the other. Planting and regenerating forest is something I am unsurprisingly very interested to investigate and pursue. However, I see that fits more with our climate change strategy than waste minimisation. I look forward to advancing this work in the near future. I will be voting for those in our community who want this service and live with disabilities, who are elderly, who live in our CBD and for our planet. I will be voting to retain the curbside food scrap service.
Councillor Glenda.
Thank you. Thank you. Well said, Councillor Meltzer. First of all, just like others have said, I'd like to thank the CE and the officers, in particular Morgan, for the time taken to prepare this paper. Not done in 5 minutes and in such a short time frame as well, and it's hugely detailed, so thank you. I am on record saying it would take some compelling evidence for me to change my position. I don't like flip-flopping. Flip-flopping costs money. However, tonight I'm flip-flopping. The fact that the mandate has been removed is not really a factor for me. The fact is, it is not the most cost-effective way to minimise carbon emissions, and I agree actually with you, Councillor Charlotte, that it is an and. But you know, when we are making decisions about spending money, surely it's a habit that we should have, that we're always reviewing the cost-effective way to be able to do things, and in this case I think it's the same. We've heard from a lot of people in the community who don't want the service, and I've been talking to a lot of people face to face over the last few days who do want the service. However, those who don't want the service has been consistent over the years in saying so, and I suppose human behaviour is such that if someone is happy, they say nothing. If this decision today lands on cancelling the food scrap service, responsibility still lies with each of us to be responsible. Compost, at least if you can at home, or use a private operator that is available to us here in Wanganui. And to Councillor Josh's comment about the strategy, the waste minimisation strategy plan that was developed in 2021, that's a 7-year plan, and I'd be really surprised if there weren't variables along the way. 7 years is a long time. So I think it's always a good idea to review the plan that gets put in place. If the waste management and minimisation plan wasn't being reviewed next year, I would have requested that it be brought forward so we could look at other options in education as it's been tabled. So thank you for those amendments up there, Councillor Charlotte. We can relook at different options in that review that can still be for the greater good of the community and the planet while being more cost effective, and I really look forward to that.
I'm going to go to Councillor Michael on screen.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. You know, it's funny, I'm changing my speech ever so slightly now because I'm sitting here, the most unprofessional I've ever looked. And this is the only time you're ever going to catch me in a cowboy hat and a t-shirt. And I'm sitting here looking at the Lake Taupo, surrounded by the next generation, our little tamariki and some rangatahi sitting here. And I'm thinking about them, and literally just now they finished their dinner and they've scraped all the scrapes of their food into a compost area. That's what I'm going to talk about right now, is how wonderful the next generation is going to be with the right education. And I'm going to focus on that it's the curbside recycling, curbside food waste is a good thing, but it's not the right thing. That we can hit the targets in waste management without incurring $1.2 million. And I'm absolutely very keen on helping those with disability join the rest of us on composting and removing the carbon equivalency. You all know that I've sent a couple of emails, and obviously you've all read them. But we are faced with a critical question. Should ratepayers' funds be used to achieve environmental or social gain? Now, I can only think of 3 good options for this. 1, it's mandated by central government. 2, the community demands it. Or 3, there's a long-term net benefit that outweighs short-term costs. Although Wellington and previous administrations made plans to enforce mandatory measures, promising new laws in March 2023, this never materialised, and I think I know the reason why. If you look at the data from Australia, United States, Canada, and United Kingdom, and I've sent a good number of you this information, there has been a significant pushback against a one-size-fits-all curbside approach. The data simply does not support the notion that spending the ratepayers' funds to collect food at source via long, inefficient truck routes to a central processing area is the right solution. In contrast, the United Kingdom experience has shown us at a large scale that investing in local composting programs coupled with financial and educational support can increase from a mere 5 to 7% up to 34%. Now imagine diverting 200 kilograms of food waste per person from our landfills, and instead of trucking it off to Raparoa, 4,600 people use that compost to help their whānau, to help their community, to grow vegetables and be part of the life cycle that is food. The environmental message is clear, and I totally agree with people who are saying the environment message. Yes, it's really good, but it's 0.02% of our region's carbon dioxide equivalents. It's a nothing. It is a nothing. And the fact of the matter is that if that was where your focus is, there are better solutions for this. No, what we really want here is to reduce our food waste and to ensure that we can help lower the cost for our ratepayers. Now, I say you can reduce the waste. That's because 8% of the waste is food, which means you should be able to lower how much you actually send to the landfill, which costs you less. But also 16% is green waste, as per the 2021 report that you've all read. If 16% is green waste, why are we charging for green waste disposal? Why are we not supporting composting, which allows green waste as well? So I wanted to address those key arguments. We can focus on a different solution for waste minimization that will not only meet the same amount, right? As you heard it today, the food scraps trial was about 20%, which would mean 3,600 people may love the service. If we focus on the UK studies, US studies, the Canadian studies, we could get a 36% composting. People who actually enjoy doing it, which means that not only do we actually reduce the amount of waste that's going to landfills, but we actually engage in a community-first local solutions for local people.
20 seconds.
While the
Michael.
challenge of managing, while the challenge of managing food waste is really significant, our response must be tailored to what is best for Wanganui, and the people have been clear on this. Let's not fall into the trap of spending more on a service just because it was by somebody else's idea. Instead, let's invest on an innovative, locally driven solution that delivers real measurable benefits and not follow past government.
Okay,
As Peter said,
I'm going to have to wrap you up, Michael.
let's lead and not be led.
Okay, thank you. And thanks for persevering online there. I'm going to Councillor Kate.
Thank you. I feel like I've been reading different information than what some of my colleagues have been. I will be, look, I believe that cancelling the food waste collection service is a backward step. I do not support cancelling the planned service. I do not support pushing out the contract for a further 5 years, because that will only transfer risk and potential future savings to future ratepayers. I found it really difficult, this issue, because we've heard a lot from the community. So perhaps more than any other issue in the park, maybe not more than any other issue, but certainly up there, I've gone out and talked to people, because I find when you approach people to discuss issues and ask their views, you tend to get a lot more moderate, informed information than those who feel those keyboard warriors who sling off often uninformed, not always, of course, not always, but often uninformed opinions. So what I've tried to do is go back to first principles. Look at this with a lens on how we best serve our community both now and the future. When I rendered down the issue, and that pun's intended, namely dealing with food scraps is the best possible way given the cost, the question I've been asking myself, in our modern, increasingly intensified communities, what should be a public good and therefore should be a service offered to and yes paid for by community members versus what should be the responsibility of private individuals? Then how do we balance the private, public good, private the public good, private responsibility question with imposing additional costs via rates, in particular on those on low and fixed incomes, and in an environment where many people are resistant to change, and we've seen that with the recycling service, where people are getting on board with it and actually finding, yeah, it's not a bad thing, I'm glad we're doing this. Just in terms of intensification, the coordinated section, they are few and far between. Our communities are getting more intensified, and we actively encourage that. And I just want to read an excerpt from some notes I made with a community member, mum, 4 children, 6 people in the household, obviously. They're not high earners. They live in Wanganui East. And she talked to me about that she's dealt with her food waste in different ways. The other thing you should know about her is she's got a master's, and her thesis was disposing of waste in refuge in Fiji, in low socio-economic communities. So she's used open and closed composting, worm farms, digging in techniques. Most of these techniques require space away from the house. They require effort, time and knowledge. I've done extensive research and troubleshooting, and flies, rodents, odour and lack of time are big challenges. I would prefer a collection service personally, and I'm prepared to pay for it. Not just for myself, but if my neighbour composts badly, it is us who has to put up with the flies, smells and the rodents. Contrast that with the food waste collection issues such as contamination that can be eradicated with good information, and consequences such as no pickup and leaflets explaining the error. We are seeing what is happening in terms of modifying members of our community behaviour with the recycling service. So she concluded with, in her view, that the secondary techniques such as composting, garden and worm farming are a great tool, but will only work for a minority. Cost is a factor, times are tough, but instead of cancelling the rollout of the service, let's go back to the annual plan to trim even further next year's rates so that we can accommodate what I believe is a valuable service to get our community on board with, and compensate for the cost, the additional cost that will be in the rates. Finally, I'd say that from the information I've seen, modern cities have decided that food collection services are the way of going, are a way of properly managing the waste process well. And I don't see compelling evidence that Wanganui District Council knows better. Just to conclude, this has been a difficult process. I don't think it will go down as one of the most attractive in terms of our decision-making process. I think we've muddled our way through it. I would really like to see us do better in the future.
Final comment from Councillor Jenny.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's never too late to make good decisions. We're here to make the best decision we can for our community, both for now and into the future. And we've heard ad nauseum about the government mandates for food scrap collection and its reversal. It's now sensible for us to stop for a moment and reevaluate. And it is good when new information comes in, when new thinking. You know, we cannot be stuck in a thought that is way back. If you think of some of the things we used to think 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago that have gone by the wayside, they're outdated. I've heard people say, but recycling and food scraps collection wasn't compulsory till 2027. So you're a bit naughty to introduce the recycling earlier, weren't you? But no, we weren't, because for every year that we left it, knowing it was going to be mandated, it was costing more and more and more. So it was appropriate for us to move down the path of setting up food scraps recycling, because each year that we were going to do it, it was going to cost us a lot more. And if all councils jumped in 2027 and did it, imagine the call on resources and the additional cost then. So we were making the right decision. But when I think back to that waste minimisation strategy that we developed back in, 21, 22, when I think about it, we were talking about volume. the cost per tonne to the landfill was costing more and more and was going to be increasing significantly over time. We talked about volume. Now, at the same time, one of the big volumes was construction and industrial waste. What have we done since then to target that volume? We've done nothing. As a council, we've done nothing. So that's where the big volume is. But we didn't talk about methane. And believe me, methane is relevant. I'm not saying it's not. I voted back in, I think, 2022 for the service. And why did I do that? It's like, oh gosh, did I? I don't recall doing that. But it was because of the mandate. It was coming. It was going to cost us more not to. We were going to be subsidised. It was something that we couldn't change. So look, suck it up. But I was showing the minutes, and my comment didn't make sense. It's like it was talking oddly, and I thought, well, no, that comment can't be right. My bad, because I should have checked the minutes, and I didn't. So I went back and listened to the replay. And I talked then about needing to educate our community about composting. Interesting when you do dig back. Another comment I heard recently was that those who have the luxury of home composting are selfish for not allowing others to have food scrap collection at the gate. We have no regard for the future environment. Seriously? And home composting is a luxury? Not in my view. We all have a responsibility to do it where we can. It is an obligation. And there are ways to do it. You don't have to have the good old like we do, you know, stick up some boards and keep it away from the house and monitor your pests, because they are relevant. There are other ways to do it that can be quite well contained. In hot composting, you can put almost anything into hot composting. So it is an option, and it is an option that we need to educate and maybe even help to resource our community. Methane. Yes, methane in landfills is really an issue. There's no question about that. But also one of the bigger contributors is green waste. And a lot of people are putting green waste into their rubbish bins, and it is going out on a weekly, fortnightly basis. Anything that's organic in a landfill will eventually turn into methane. So we've got a lot of educating to do around broader issues than just our food scraps. I really do want to thank Councillor Michael Law for providing us with such really good comparative information about the effects of methane. That was really, really helpful, and I think it has helped a number of people around the table make a better decision. Yes, we do need to deal with the methane, but we need to find other ways to do it, much less costly ways that don't impact on our community as much as this. We have a significantly higher proportion of single income and retired residents here in Wanganui. These people are already stretched to breaking point. Some of them are past breaking point.
30 seconds.
Thank you. Many are foregoing food on the table, heating in winter, insurances. And a recent example of our decision working against our community are the changes and increases in parking charges. There definitely were unintended consequences of that. Many people are now suffering from anxiety just going into town. It's affecting social interaction in retailers, and that's a result of a decision that we made that we need to go back and have another look at and refine. It's never too late to refine our decisions. I want to thank my colleagues, council officers, and all those involved for putting a huge amount of time and thought into the information that was given today. It is really fantastic, and I will be supporting the resolutions as they stand. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll just close off right of reply. So once again, I want to thank our Chief Executive and Council officers for the work you put into this in the last 2 weeks, and for those council staff that have been abused. I know because I've actually spoken to them as well, and I've heard that. I'm also, my apologies on behalf of our community who would not like that. I'm assuming it's just a very few. We're here today because I've asked for this matter to be revisited to reverse the decision to introduce curbside food collection service because it is the right thing to do, or should I say not to do. 2 weeks ago we had an indicative vote around the table of 7 votes to 6 to retain the service. And I sense that's going to change today. I'm going to pick on 2 points briefly that I raised in my 6 points. The fourth point was around affordability. I've pushed for a more streamlined and efficient council, which, since in my time here, which followed the introduction of a 6-point plan, which has tasked our Chief Executive to find cost savings, efficiencies, revenue opportunities to reduce the rate burden for all of us, which we have done incredibly well. All of us have felt the pain. So a 1.5% rates impact is enough of a reason to not go ahead with this. All of us across the community have worked hard, and as a result of it, I'm expecting a significant reduction for our rates in the 25-26 year against the LTP. The other point I want to raise is point 6, and that is our community have consistently spoken from the early days. They do not want the service, they still don't. Let's show them that we are a council who listens. We're also revisiting this item because the dynamics have changed. The mandate was dropped without fanfare and correspondence from the ministry. Dropping of the mandate gave us a good reason to not move ahead, to move forward, and following the recent visit by council officers to the contractor to minimise sunk costs so that the net impact of removing the service is now only 1.5% of our rates, I want to say thank you to low cost bins. In reference to social media, that is actually one way that we listen. But I can tell you Whanganui and area news is not gospel, but it was pretty resounding, and other social media also demonstrated that. The other way to listen to people is being out and about in the community. And I've done that, and I can say that that many people I've spoken with simply do not want this service for the 6 reasons and more that I've outlined and you have all outlined as well. A decision to move ahead with this is a boondoggle. Thank you. So I'm going to, no further comments. I'm going to put the motion on the screen as it's written. I've already read it out. I'm not going to read it out again. Yep, yeah, I'll do that. So I'm going to put the motion on the screen. We're happy to do okay, we'll go through them separately. So the first one is that that the council cancels with immediate effect the implementation of the planned kerbside food scraps collection. All those in favour? All those against? And abstain? I didn't think any there abstain. So no, he was in favour. So the motion is carried. Thank you. Item B delegates authority to the Chief Executive to vary the kerbside collection service contract for service with the contractor. 2. 1. Remove the food scraps collection from the scope of the contract. 2. Extend the term of contract by up to 5 additional years. 3. Adjust the schedule of prices in the contract to account for the above changes. All those in favour? Against?
Keep your hands up, please.
Okay. Motion is carried. Item C notes that not proceeding with the food scraps collection service is inconsistent with the Waste Management and Minimisation Plan 2021. All those in favour? Against? Okay, that's unanimous. D broadens the scope of waste minimisation education. Okay. Against? No, that's carried. And the last one, E, notes through the Waste Management and Minimisation Plan review will include an investigation of opportunities to partner with our community to encourage home composting, including bin subsidy, education and pest management, and commercial food waste diversion from landfill. All those in favour? Against? Again, unanimous. That is the end of the meeting. Thank you very much. Appreciate everyone's time. Thank you for those online. Thank you, Michael, for tuning in. And I'm going to close off with the karakia. E hoa kia runga, kia ranganui, e hoa kia raro, kia papatuanuku, whakatairanga, te kupu, te korero, te mahi, ki te pau e te wari, he taonga, he mahi a muri, ka puta, kita wai au, kita o marama, homie hui e, taiki e. All right, thank you everyone. Time for dinner.